Ted never stopped admiring Shelley. "What a beauty you are," he would say with such adoration that it made her uncomfortable. "All men envy me for having such a smart and beautiful woman." Shelley frowned, slowly shifting her gaze to her husband, who sat in a chair with his foot on her leg, admiring her. "Are you saying that if I was less beautiful, you would pay no attention to me, and could even cheat on me?" she asked. Compliments were nice, but not when they only focused on her looks. Shelley disliked people who judged others solely based on their appearance. People aren't always blessed with exceptional looks, like Ted. He was an ordinary guy, but he had that special something. Although Shelley's mother often advised her daughter to take off the rose-coloured glasses and look at him from a different angle, Ted didn't earn much, gave her flowers infrequently, and lived with his mother. After their wedding, his plan was to move into Shelley's apartment. In addition, even now Shelley had to pay for most of their joint vacations with mutual friends. The young woman hoped things would change after the wedding. Ted was currently taking courses and was soon going to switch from a part-time job to a permanent one. "Well, honey, don't misinterpret my words. It's a compliment," he said. Shelley smiled, but she still felt a lingering discomfort. Beauty is fleeting, present today and perhaps gone tomorrow. No one knows what the future holds. Shelley's mood darkened, and she no longer wanted to attend Ted's best friend's birthday party. "Why are you so glum? It's a celebration. We should be happy on such a splendid day," Ted chuckled, hugging Shelley. "Are you upset? Should I stop praising your slim waist and beautiful face?" "Ted, do you love me or just my appearance?" Shelley asked seriously. "Your beauty is a part of you. You're overreacting. It's difficult to please women. They get upset if you don't compliment them, and then they sulk when you do. I can't win," Ted said, breaking the hug and heading towards the door, leaving Shelley alone. Regaining her composure, Shelley slid her feet into her new sandals, buckled the straps and followed Ted. Maybe he was right, and she had overreacted. "Ted, did you buy a present for Ben?" she asked once they were in the car. Ted's mother gave him a car, often emphasizing her ability to afford such an expensive gift for her son. She often implied that Shelley should be grateful to use her car. "I didn't buy anything, but as they say, the best gift for him is us," Ted said. Shelley was a little bit ashamed. She was not accustomed to showing up at someone's house, especially for a birthday, without a gift. "Ted, that's rude. You know I can't do that," Shelley responded indignantly. "Oh, don't start again. You know I'm having financial issues right now, and Ben knows that my studies don't allow me any time to work. Stop complaining. Let's just go and sincerely congratulate him. That's it." "No, let's stop and buy him something. I have some savings," Shelley insisted. "Well, if you say so," Ted smiled, seemingly expecting such a response. They visited the mall and purchased a wristwatch. Although it cost slightly more than Shelley had budgeted for the gift, Ted insisted on it, arguing that Ben would discard a cheaper watch. "Why did you park the car here, Ted? You said we'd just stop by, congratulate Ben, have a short stay and then head home," Shelley asked as they parked a block away from Ben's house, near a posh high-rise. "Well, he lives in a risky neighbourhood, while this place is full of surveillance cameras everywhere. Plus, a walk is good exercise. We need to stay fit," Ted replied. After 10 minutes of walking, the couple noticed a massive cloud of smoke and a burning odour that provoked concern. Ted noticed the fire and attempted to lighten the mood by joking that he hoped his friends weren't so intoxicated that they set the house on fire with fireworks. Shelley shuddered at such a statement. As Shelley approached the crowd, she saw a small house going up in flames. One room was already engulfed in bright flames, while another was on the verge. And then, through the hum of the people gathered around and the crackling of the fire, Shelley heard the child's cry, and her heart squeezed. Perhaps it was a play of the imagination, but that cry was like an impulse to rush there and help. "Shelley, why are you just standing there? We're late. We're going to miss out on the fun, and Ben will be upset that his best friend didn't show up." Ted tugged on her arm, but Shelley only had eyes for the window. "There's a child there, Ted. We have to help him," she said, scanning the crowd. Many were filming the scene on their cell phones, seemingly oblivious to the child's cry. "What child?" Ted scoffed. Shelley looked at her fiancé, then back at the window. Her eyes and ears weren't deceiving her. Now there really was a child's figure there. Without a second thought, she pulled her arm free and rushed towards the burning house, intent on saving the child. Flames were already licking at the door. There was no other way in. If she didn't act now, the child would die. From a distance she heard Ted shouting at her, calling her a fool and saying he wouldn't wait for her. Shelley opened the front door, which fortunately was not locked. She shrieked as the voracious flames surged towards her, a burning beam collapsing from the ceiling just a meter away. By the time she reached the room, it felt as if her skin was on fire. The intense heat was unbearable, yet at that moment she was not thinking about herself. A frightened little boy was huddled in the corner. She beckoned him, but he was too scared to move. Locking the door to his room to prevent the flames from entering, Shelley surveyed the smoke-filled space. The windows were old and wooden. She didn't know how long it would take to open them and get out. "Trust me, okay? I'll help you. I'm a good fairy who will save you. Just don't run away, and don't be afraid of me, okay?" The boy looked surprised and nodded. His long-sleeved sweater was slightly burned, and his pants had holes in them. Seeing this, Shelley felt a painful twinge in her heart. The boy approached Shelley and clung to her leg as she struggled to open the windows. The old latches were stubborn, and the alarming crackle of the approaching fire made her throat tighten. Finally, she managed to open the windows, climbed onto the sill, and swiftly lifted the boy into her arms. She felt a painful sting on her chest and looked down to see her dress clinging to her, scorched by the flames. Overwhelmed by adrenaline, she hadn't noticed that she had been burned. She knew she would have to treat the burn for a while, but the most important thing was that she had managed to save the boy's life. She lowered the boy to the ground and got out the house herself. The smell of burning sent waves of nausea through her. Exiting the gate, she gazed at the onlookers, realizing that Ted wasn't among them. He had chosen a friend's birthday over the safety of his fiancée. The wailing sirens of the fire truck and an ambulance shattered the air. The entire house was consumed by fire. Weak from smoke inhalation and burns, Shelley barely managed to stay on her feet. A stern voice asked, "Is anybody still at home?" Startled, Shelley shrugged and responded, "I don't know, I'm a passerby. I rescued the boy I saw in the window." The child pointed at the house and said, "Mum." Shelley held him tighter, whispering reassurances, although she knew his mother likely didn't survive. As a paramedic approached, Shelley handed him the child, then nearly fainted. Another paramedic led her to the ambulance, muttering about her young age and severe burns. "Can I have a drink, please?" she managed to mumble, before losing consciousness. Shelley woke up in the hospital, her head throbbing and her body aching. She didn't know how long she had been there. When she saw her bandaged hands and realized her face, chest, and legs were similarly bound, she was horrified. She remembered the flames licking at her as she made her way to the boy's room, but she hadn't thought her burns were so severe. Tears welled in her eyes. A nurse entered the room and, seeing Shelley conscious, approached with a look of sympathy. "Why are you crying? You're our heroine," the older woman warmly smiled. "A heroine? I just did what any human being should do," Shelley replied. "Exactly. Should. But not everyone would. Gretchen, the paramedic who brought you in, told me that the men just stood by and watched. You heroically saved the boy. Without you, he wouldn't have survived. Your story has been in the news for the past 5 days. There's a swarm of reporters around the hospital wanting to interview you. 5 days? I thought it was only 2 days. Have I been unconscious for that long? Don't be surprised. You inhaled a lot of smoke and were unconscious for a while. Then the doctors decided to keep you sedated to let your body recover without the stress of crying or hysterics. They performed a skin graft on your face. Tears trickled down her cheeks, soaking into the gauze wrapped around her face. Shelley remembered Ted's words from their last conversation about his fixation on her looks. He probably wouldn't comment on her beauty anymore, she thought. Has anyone visited me? The woman inquired, hopefully. Your mum came by. She's distressed about you. She just left the hospital. Before that, she was by your side. She had to leave, but promised to return soon, the nurse replied. Shelley let out a sigh, trying to dispel her sadness. Could Ted really be so upset that he hadn't even attempted to contact her these past 5 days? Where's my phone? I need to phone my fiancé that I'm okay. Your mum took care of your personal belongings. You can ask her about them when she arrives. Now, I need to check on other patients. Rest up. The doctor will be visiting tonight. As the nurse was about to leave, Shelley stopped her. Wait, what about the boy? Do you know what caused the fire, and if his mother survived? The boy is alive thanks to you. His mother unfortunately did not fare as well. She fell asleep with a lit cigarette, which caused the fire. Luckily, the boy had the sense to lock himself in his room. After the nurse left, Shelley was left alone with her thoughts. While various ideas swirled in her mind, one kept her particularly uneasy. Did Ted call, or did he no longer need her? Shelley's mother arrived at the hospital soon and brought her things. In tears, she wailed, "You were brave but reckless. I was terrified when I got the call. Thank God everything worked out and you're alive. Do you understand how it could have ended?" It could have ended with the death of a child, so I don't really regret anything, Mum. I'm sorry I had to upset you. Is Dad with Molly? Yes, I had to take your little sister to her father. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but you need me more than she does right now. Mum, you should go home. I can manage. I have Ted. Tell me where the phone is. I'll call him and inform him about my situation. I'm sure he'll come immediately to support me. He must be worried. Mum looked at Shelley with pity and chewed her lips in silence. Shelley could see that she wanted to say something, but was hesitant. This made her feel uncomfortable, as the most dreadful thoughts were swirling around in her mind. What's wrong, Mum? What do you know? Please don't be silent. Tell me the truth. Did something happen to Ted? You no longer have Ted. The doctors called him first, informed him about your situation, and then... Mum paused, as if gathering her thoughts. He called and told me that he couldn't be with you, that he didn't need you like this, that he was withdrawing the application from the registry office. Shelley, don't worry. Everything will be fine. We're with you. If you like, Molly and I will move in with you, or you can move in with us. We won't abandon you in times of trouble. Is it that bad? Shelley asked fearfully, looking in the mirror hanging on the wall above the sink. Instead of a beautiful girl, Shelley saw a real mummy. It was terrifying to even imagine what was under the bandages. You've had surgery. Your father paid for the best possible treatment, but the doctor said you would need plastic surgery to avoid a scar. You can do that later if you wish. They did everything they could. Each word was delivered with difficulty by her mother, and Shelley struggled to believe her. Shelley shook her head, fighting back tears. The pain of accepting such a truth was immense. Some of the tears must have seeped into her bandages, causing a stinging sensation. She gritted her teeth against the pain. Mum, where's my phone? I need to speak to Ted. I need to hear from him directly that he doesn't want me anymore. Please, give me my phone." If she heard it from him, she would accept that it was over, that he had left and no longer needed her. Until then, it all seemed like a terrible dream, a nightmare from which she couldn't awaken. Her mother stood up, walked over to the nightstand, took out her phone and handed it to her. "But if I were you, I wouldn't beg, sweetheart. Why do you need him? Why do you want to humiliate yourself for such a man?" Shelley looked through the missing calls, and they were all from work. Ted hadn't called. Her friends had vanished as well. Shelley saw an opened message from Ted, most likely read by her mother. "I've removed the application from the registry office. Recover, and then we'll see if I need a wife like you." Shelley felt a piercing pain in her heart. She hadn't believed he could betray her like this. Although she had her suspicions, she had tried to believe in the best. Now, the best was nothing more than a bitter memory. Glancing at the engaging ring on the nightstand, she realized she would never wear it again. Why should she, when there was no wedding and the groom had fled at the first sign of trouble? "Mum, I can handle this," she insisted. "Go to Molly. She's not used to her father. It's hard for her. I'll take care of everything. If I need anything, I'll ask Michelle to bring it to the hospital." Sarah lowered her head, understanding that Shelley was right. Molly had been born to her at her late age. Shelley was already in her 20s, and Sarah was in her 40s. Her marriage to Shelley's father was crumbling. Perhaps she was trying to keep him by having another child, or just wanted to find some joy in the little one, because she felt that soon Shelley would fly out of the family nest, and her husband would leave as well. And he did leave when Sarah was 7 months pregnant. In all her 7 years, Molly has seen him only on holidays, mistaking him for a distant uncle. "Are you sure you can handle this?" Sarah asked, her voice heavy with concern. "Of course, Mum," Shelley replied. "Thank you for your support. I won't shed tears for a man who doesn't deserve them. You were right. Ted isn't worth it." Sarah cried and hugged Shelley, who struggled to contain her emotions. Shelley didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her or to view her as an invalid. Despite the terrible incident, she had survived, just like the innocent boy who had almost died in a fire because of his mother. Taking Shelley's promise to keep in touch and report everything that happens, her mother said she would buy tickets for the next plane and return home to Molly. When she left the room, Shelley let all her emotions out and sobbed bitterly. Probably loving heart still could not accept the fact that Ted did such a despicable thing to her, since he had sworn that he would love Shelley to the grave. But instead, he gave up easily and quickly when she needed him. The tears quickly turned into a real hysteria, so the doctors again sedated Shelley to sleep more and recover faster. The next morning, Michelle visited Shelley with gifts and words of encouragement. She praised Shelley's bravery, admitting that she would have been too scared to act as Shelley had. "Well, you've always been reckless, so what's surprising?" chuckled Michelle. "Don't worry, it'll heal before the wedding. It's in December, isn't it?" Her friend's words stung Shelley. "There won't be a wedding, Michelle. But you're right, everything will heal in time." Shelley knew better than anyone that scars do not heal. They linger for life. The most painful ones are the heart wounds inflicted by those closest to you. "Wait, there's no wedding? Why? When did you and Ted break up? And why didn't you tell me?" Michelle was shocked. "He left me over the phone when he found out I was burned saving a boy." "What a jerk!" Michelle exclaimed. "He thinks I'm a freak," Shelley said, fighting back tears. 3 weeks later, Shelley was discharged from the hospital. She had minor marks on her hands and some ugly patches of skin on her face, but otherwise she was healing nicely. Michelle met Shelley at the hospital with a bunch of balloons, which they released into the sky. Shelley was given a week off from work and promised a work-from-home arrangement until the new year, giving her time to recover. When Shelley and Michelle arrived at the apartment building, Shelley saw Ted at the entrance. He was standing at the entrance, holding a bouquet of flowers and waiting for someone. Shelley's heart skipped a beat, thinking he had come to his senses to apologize. Except that, when she and Michelle approached, he wrinkled his nose in disgust. "Ted, why didn't you let us know you were coming?" Shelley asked. "You should have sent a message or called." "Oh, Shelley, I haven't come to you," Ted remarked, chuckling. Another painful remark lodged itself into her memory. Shelley nodded and tried to leave, but her ex-fiancé seemed intent on causing a scene. "So you thought I bought such a beautiful bouquet for such a freak?" Ted asked, scrunching his face in distaste. "Mind your language before you lose your tongue," Michelle retorted. "You're no better than a monkey yourself, yet you act as if you're Apollo descending among us mortals." Michelle put her arm around Shelley, who reached into her pocket for the apartment keys. "Let me be a monkey, but not so ugly. You've hit the jackpot, Shelley. Now I'll never tell you how beautiful you are again, and no one will." Shelley turned away and sobbed with resentment, but she didn't respond to him. Meanwhile, Michelle was already going to say something in response to such cruel words when the entrance door opened and Shelley's neighbour Paula, who lived 2 floors below, stepped out. She often asked Ted and Shelley for lifts, and now Shelley realised it wasn't just for convenience. They probably had a thing even when she and Ted were engaged. Frozen in shock, Shelley watched as Paula hung around her ex-fiancé's neck, kissed him, and accepted the bouquet with delight. Ted held Paula close and led her to his car, whispering that Shelley was so ugly. The girl giggled nastily, glancing her way as if to show Shelley she had won a game. "Shelley, let's go to the apartment already. Stop humiliating yourself in front of them. He's not worthy of you," Michelle insisted, and Shelley nodded. She was right. He wasn't worthy. "You just have to move on. Everything will pass. All wounds will heal. We'll see how he feels when it's too late." Shelley knew her friend was right, but she couldn't bear to see her reflection. Disgusted by her own appearance, she chose to avoid mirrors, as her skin was still healing. She felt a deep self-loathing and didn't want to face herself. When Michelle left, Shelley covered all the mirrors in her apartment, deciding that she would eventually accept herself, but not any time soon. Left alone in her apartment, Shelley succumbed to tears, reminiscing about the last time she was with Ted, who was now with another woman. When Shelley finally calmed down, she thought of the boy she had saved. She wondered about his well-being and felt a connection to him, as if they were 2 halves of a broken soul. The next day, Shelley found out which orphanage he was in and decided to visit him. The teacher who greeted Shelley was kind-hearted and praised her for her actions. Yet Shelley felt uncomfortable with such admiration, questioning why acts of kindness were perceived as heroic. The teacher described Kyle, the boy Shelley saved, as a quiet, intimidated child who often cried and appeared to be waiting for someone. She led Shelley down a narrow corridor towards the meeting room. "Does he have no family? Was his mother his only close relative?" she asked. "Not exactly. Kyle has a father, but the situation is complex. His mother was officially a single. It appears the guardianship authorities found Kyle's father, who regularly sent money for the child, but they can't get in touch with him. Neighbours say he visited once a year, but the mother consistently rejected him. She accepted his money but denied him entry. We don't know if he'll return. He might have started a new family, thinking he's unwanted and unnecessary here. Kyle can't be adopted yet, but we can formalise guardianship until we find his father. Kyle needs a family, but who would take in such a troubled and traumatised child? It will take time for Kyle to adjust to a new environment." Shelley didn't understand why the woman was telling all this to her. She had just come to see the child and meet him. She hadn't intended to look after him, let alone adopt him. Meanwhile, Shelley felt anger towards Kyle's father, seeing him as irresponsible. He had only provided financial support while his son lived with a careless mother. He didn't try to save his child, even though he knew about the mother's character. Perhaps all men are like this, Shelley thought, reflecting on her own experiences. She didn't want any new relationships now. What was the purpose? In her eyes, men weren't reliable. Her own father had left their family. Her ex-partner, Ted, abandoned her when she lost her youthful looks. Now, Kyle's father had left his son with an unreliable woman and was absent when his child needed him most. Probably there are no more strong, devoted men who are ready to be near their women and children, no matter the situation. Shelley sighed heavily, burdened by the weight of her thoughts. The trials of life seemed overwhelming, and while lost in contemplation, she found herself in the meeting room. The teacher had promised to bring Kyle soon. She sat on the soft sofa, observing the toys and drawing table. This was where prospective parents met the children, studying their behaviour to select the child most compatible with their character. It was as if they were picking pets to adapt to their lifestyle. But this thinking felt flawed to Shelley. If your heart is drawn to a child, you should be the one to adjust, to adapt, and to grow accustomed to a shared life, rather than forcing the child to conform to your habits. Soon the teacher returned, hand in hand with a boy in pyjamas, a scar similar to Shelley's adorning his cheek. They shared this unique feature, a fact that made Shelley smile sadly. It was like a birthmark. "Hi, Kyle," she greeted, and the boy regarded Shelley in surprise for a moment. He clung to the teacher's hand, but upon recognizing who was standing in front of him, he rushed towards Shelley, shouting, "Fairy!" "Yes, it's me, your fairy," the woman smiled, instantly understanding what he was referring to. The boy clung to Shelley, sobbing. The teacher excused herself, stating she would return in about 10 minutes to see how things were progressing. The boy remained mostly silent. He spent the entire 10 minutes in Shelley's arms. Then he jumped off, ran to the table, and started drawing. Shelley watched him, her heart aching at the thought of human cruelty. She couldn't understand why his mother hadn't possessed the feelings commonly referred to as maternal. Why hadn't she paused to appreciate her little ray of sunshine? Why was alcohol more valuable to her than her own child? "Fairy!" The boy ran up to Shelley, showing his drawing. His innocent sincerity and straightforwardness brought tears to her eyes. He had drawn a small figure with wings. Shelley accepted the drawing, patting the little boy on the head. The teacher peeked into the room, gestured that she was in the next room, and indicated that Shelley could call her at any minute. But Shelley didn't want to leave the boy. She felt a strong connection to him, even if she couldn't understand why. They had both been abandoned by their loved ones due to shared misfortune. Shelley moved to the mat and played with Kyle using some toys. The boy was clever. If his parents had nurtured him, he might be more developed now. His speech was poor for his age, and Shelley wanted to help him, to teach him, but she was uncertain if she could. "Hurt!" The boy pointed to the burn on Shelley's face, and the woman nodded. "Yes, you and I have similar wounds," she replied with a smile. The boy climbed back into Shelley's lap and hugged her. They sat like that for a while, until the teacher returned and announced it was time for lunch and then nap. Shelley nodded and looked into the frightened eyes of Kyle. The boy understood that it was time for him to leave, and they were being separated. "Don't worry, I will definitely come to see you again." "Tomorrow?" asked Kyle, and Shelley smiled. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I have to work tomorrow, but we will definitely meet again, I promise you." Kyle pouted, lowered his head, and went to the teacher. He turned around several times, looking hopefully in Shelley's direction. When he was taken away, the woman cried in despair. She knew she couldn't get too attached to him because he had a father. Although the man wasn't as reliable as one would hope a father to be, he still had more rights. The boy's relatives on his father's side could potentially take him away. Perhaps Shelley shouldn't have visited, as her heart was now tied to the boy, and she wanted to help him by becoming a family for him, but she realized that this was impossible. Shelley clutched the child's drawing and left, agonizing over what to do next. Stepping outside, she breathed in the aroma of the autumn air, filled with a mysterious magic, and involuntarily smiled. Could it be that fate had brought her together with this child? Her bosses at work were understanding, allowing her to do all her reporting from home. Shelley had taken work home before, as it was more convenient. She could get more paperwork done in a few hours at home than she could in an entire day at the office. Her boss gently suggested that she might return when she would feel more comfortable. Shelley wanted to tell him that her appearance didn't bother her in the least, but that would be a lie. After enduring insults from her ex, Shelley became withdrawn. She started wearing caps and big sunglasses, lowering her head in public to hide her scarred face. While plastic surgery could have easily taken care of the scar, Shelley wanted to accept her new self. However, finding the strength to do so was difficult, so now she was just trying to navigate life without her fiancé, while caring for a little boy who desperately needed her. Shelley began visiting Kyle almost daily. She enjoyed spending time with the boy, even though she knew they were growing attached, without knowing if they would ever become a family. Several months went by without any sign of the boy's father. This didn't mean Shelley could rest easy, thinking he would never return to claim his son. She couldn't shake off the fear that he might find them and try to take Kyle away from her. After much consideration, she decided to take custody of the boy. This required gathering numerous documents, but the head of the orphanage reassured her that her chances of approval were high. Whether they interacted at home or in the orphanage, Shelley felt no difference. However, she noticed the other children's aggression negatively affecting the boy, who had already endured a hard life. They ridiculed him for the scar on his face, calling him ugly. After hearing this from the teacher, Shelley was determined to take Kyle out of there as soon as possible. She began to assemble the necessary paperwork, hoping the approval wouldn't take long. "Oh, Shelley, why are you so focused on this boy?" Michelle lamented. "You don't even know who his family is. What if his father shows up? What will you do then?" "Firstly, his father hasn't come forward yet. I'm confident the police have contacted him about his ex-girlfriend's death. Secondly, I feel a strong connection with this boy. It's as if he's my own." Shelley tried to explain her bond with the boy to Michelle. Unfortunately, Michelle couldn't understand, as she had never experienced such a connection. Communicating with someone who speaks a different language can be challenging. Michelle was not a mother yet. She didn't even have siblings, so she couldn't understand Shelley. Meanwhile, Shelley's mother supported her wish to adopt the boy. Only she worried about the difficulties her daughter would face, especially as the boy would soon start to show his character. He had grown up with an alcoholic mother, and his behavior was unpredictable. Despite potential issues, Shelley was not dissuaded. She believed that they could be each other's salvation in this harsh world. Like two wandering lights in the dark, Shelley and Kyle had found each other. Both had experienced loss, and they found solace in each other. Michelle grumbled, "You'll recover after breaking up with your terrible fiancé, but what's next? You might meet a decent man, want to start a family, but you already have a burden in the form of another's child. Can't you see that happening? Does he need a child that's not even his, Shelley?" "What are you talking about?" Shelley said with reproach. "Firstly, this child is not a stranger to me, and secondly, I'm not sure if I want to get involved with another man. Michelle, everything will be fine. Kyle and I are already attached to each other. Things won't worsen if I take custody of him. I don't regret saving him and getting close." Michelle only shook her head, refraining from further argument. Winter arrived almost unnoticeably. Shelley barely had time to adjust as the city dived into the pre-New Year's hustle. The adoption paperwork, due to some missing information in the certificates, was stopped. Shelley dreamed of spending Christmas and New Year with Kyle, but it seemed unlikely. She even began to feel that destiny was stopping her from adopting the boy. Why the need for such intrigue and drama, toying with my already frayed nerves? I even purchased a bed for Kyle, New Year's pyjamas and children's bedding, Shelley complained to the headmistress after receiving yet another refusal because her work certificate was outdated. It's unfortunate that he will have to spend this magical holiday here. Actually, the woman coughed softly and looked at her carefully. There is a way, although we are not usually encouraged to do this. Volunteers or staff occasionally take children to their homes for the weekend. We know you well enough that if you sign certain papers, we could arrange for you to spend the holidays together. Afterwards, you can obtain a new certificate from your work and return with the documents, assuming you still want to adopt the child. After all, raising such an active child is challenging. Over the holidays you can evaluate whether you and Kyle can live together. I won't change my mind, you can be sure of that. Shelley nodded and smiled broadly, anticipating Kyle's joy. Well, thank you for the offer. Now I need to go. I want to buy some warm clothes and a snowsuit for Kyle. And a Christmas tree. What is New Year's without a tree? I had already bought a set of cars for Kyle, but I don't have a Christmas tree to leave my gift. Inspired by the headmistress's offer, Shelley hurried to the bus stop, thinking about which shop she could go to that day. She probably wouldn't make it to the children's store today, so she planned to go the next morning. However, she could buy the tree now. She chose an artificial Christmas tree from a supermarket near her house and decided to buy the decorations the next day. She had never decorated a tree before and usually spent holidays with her mother and sister, but until the custody papers were sorted, Shelley couldn't take Kyle out of town. Nevertheless, the boy needed to experience the magical atmosphere of the Christmas and New Year, the same one that Shelley had loved and been inspired by in her childhood. Shelley was dragging a box with a tree in front of her. Every so often she peeked around it to navigate her path and avoid colliding with passers-by. However, she miscalculated and ran into someone. The loud reprimand made her shudder. Fearfully, Shelley peered from behind the box at the man she had inadvertently bumped into. It's a shame to hear such a nice voice used for scolding. She attempted to placate the stranger. It's also a shame for someone with such pleasant looks to lash out at strangers, the man retorted, his voice tinged with irritation. Shelley quickly retreated behind the box, her face flushing with embarrassment. In the dim light of the alleyway, the man couldn't see her scar. That's likely why he complimented her looks. Excuse me, Shelley peered out again. You suddenly appeared in my path. Can I pass by? She wanted to quickly diffuse the awkward situation. After all, he also should have been more aware of his surroundings. It was Shelley who had her view obstructed, not him. Her hands were freezing, despite wearing gloves. She felt cold and yearned for a cup of hot tea. Are you hurrying to bump into someone else? You were lucky it was me you hit. What if it had been a frail old lady? The man retorted. Shelley's hands were beginning to shake with fatigue, and she still had 3 or 4 more houses to pass. You're also at fault, by the way. Your view wasn't obstructed, and you saw where you were going. She tried to justify herself. Really? And you're so brave speaking from behind a box. Too afraid to look into the eyes of a man you nearly ran over? Is guilt eating you up? Shelley exhaled noisily and peeked out from behind the box. The man was looking at her with smiling eyes, the corners of which were lined with wrinkles. He seemed amused by the whole situation. Shelley was struggling to hold the box, and she was already regretting her decision to save money on a cab fare. Taking a deep breath, Shelley was ready to express her indignation at the man, but he reached for the box and wrapped his arms around it. Let me help. Why are you so clinging to it? I'm not going to take away your burden. I'll just help you carry this home, then I'll leave." Shelley clung to the box even tighter and shook her head in refusal. After her fiancé's betrayal, Shelley wasn't used to accepting help from men. "I won't let you endanger anyone else with that box. Either let me help you, or I'll call the police," said the man with a smile. "The police?" Shelley was stunned. "I can't believe you decided to call the police." "You heard right. The police. Or traffic officers. Whatever you prefer. You have violated a cardinal rule of the road. You are walking here without paying attention to the environment. You're a danger not only to yourself, but also to those around you." A smile appeared on her lips, which Shelley skillfully concealed. She found it amusing that he mentioned traffic police officers and a violated rule. After loosening her grip, Shelley realized the box had slipped from her hands. The stranger quickly hoisted it onto his shoulder. At first, Shelley feared it would fall, but he managed to hold it steady. He looked at Shelley, his eyes lingering on her scar. Out of habit, Shelley immediately looked away, hiding her face. "And where are we going?" asked the man in a gruff voice. "Straight ahead. 2 houses, then turn left. Past 1 more house and we'll be there." "And you were going to carry this heavy load this far by yourself?" The man grunted. Did he think she had a team of helpers waiting to assist? Shelley didn't respond, as the answer was quite obvious. In silence they reached her house and stopped at the entrance. "You won't let me carry this burden up to your apartment? Am I understanding that correctly?" the man asked, squinting. "You're a smart man," Shelley nodded with confidence. She didn't want to show the stranger where she lived. It sufficed that he knew her building and her entrance, and could easily trap her. At this moment, Ted and Paula emerged from the building. Ted glanced at Shelley, smirked, and sneered to Paula quietly. "The ugly woman has found a new fiancé." They were about to walk past, but the stranger placed the box on the snow next to Shelley, grabbed Ted by the shirt, and forced him to meet his gaze. "Apologize to the girl," growled the stranger, who happened to hear hurtful words. Paula screamed, attempting to summon help, but the area was deserted, and people were not keen to intervene. "There's no need for that." Shelley tried to divert the man's attention and convince him to release Ted. Suddenly it occurred to her that Ted had deliberately chosen Paula to upset her more frequently and to regularly remind her of her worthlessness. "It's necessary. Apologize, you jerk, before you're ploughing snow with your nose," the stranger repeated. Ted glanced at Shelley, then at Paula, and then back at Shelley, and finally mumbled an apology. "Louder." She didn't hear. The stranger shook him. "Sorry," Ted said with more confidence. "Remember this next time you want to insult someone. Think 100 times, or you'll end up in an embarrassing situation again," the stranger warned. Then he let go of Ted, who left quickly, with Paula running after him, remarking that Shelley had found a suitor as disgusting as she was. But Shelley was not listening. She was looking at her defender. "Thank you," she said. "Rejected boyfriend?" the man asked, gesturing in the direction Ted had left. "More like it was me who was rejected, but that doesn't matter," she admitted. "Should I invite you for tea, in gratitude for your defense?" "You don't owe me anything," the stranger replied and bid her good night. She returned his farewell and he left quickly, without sharing his name. However, Shelley's spirits were lifted. There were still some good people around, she thought. She picked up the box and went back to her apartment, thinking about Kyle's arrival the next day. She was slightly anxious, unsure of how he would react to her place. It was likely he would find it unusual at first, given his background. She had seen his previous living conditions, and knew her apartment would seem luxurious to him, but would he like it? As she sipped her hot tea, she thought again about the stranger who had stood up for her. For the first time in a while, she took a brave step. she uncovered all the mirrors in her apartment and smiled at her reflection. Then she assembled the tree and set it up in the living room. Afterward, she fell into a peaceful sleep. In the morning, Shelley called her mother and sister, had a brief conversation, and promised to visit them with Kyle once all the paperwork would be completed. Sarah simply wished her daughter for everything to go well, and little Molly expressed her eagerness to meet Kyle. After the call, Shelley headed for shopping. She had plenty of time, as Kyle could only be picked up in the evening. At the mall, as she admired the bright toys and twinkling garlands, she inadvertently bumped into someone. She was extremely embarrassed. It was the second time in 24 hours she had done this. To her surprise, it was the same stranger from yesterday. "You are making an attempt on my life," the man said confidently. "No, I mean, oh, please forgive me." Shelley stumbled over her words. "As an apology, you must tell me your name, so I know which woman to steer clear of," he responded. "Shelley." "Nice to meet you, Shelley, and my name is Jordan. I hope you won't try to knock me over again." Jordan laughed, and Shelley joined him. "Of course not. I didn't mean to." "I believe you, Shelley," Jordan nodded. "It's curious that we both decided to look at Christmas decorations at the last minute before the holiday." Shelley didn't immediately understand exactly what Jordan meant, but then she nodded and smiled. "Just a change of circumstances," she replied. "I understand. Circumstances can be elusive. I wanted to see if I could find a suitable gift, but nothing caught my eye." Shelley nodded in agreement. Jordan and she walked through the aisles together. He assisted Shelley in choosing Christmas tree decorations and shared stories from his past. Shelley was engrossed in his stories, finding it surprisingly easy and enjoyable to converse with him, but this also made her feel uneasy. After her basket was full, Jordan offered to accompany Shelley home, reasoning that she wouldn't be able to carry such a heavy load by herself. Shelley accepted. Jordan drove her home in his car and helped carry the bags into her apartment. "Now, I just have to treat you to some tea, except I don't have anything for it, so I can offer just tea or coffee." "I have a counter-proposal. Let's have lunch in a cafe. I have a rule, never accept invitations from women to have tea on their territory." Shelley breathed a sigh of relief. This arrangement was easier for her. She felt uncomfortable having a man in her apartment, especially a stranger whom she barely knew. What did Shelley know about Jordan? Only his name and a few childhood stories. One was about how he got confused hanging garlands on a tree, and another was about how he purposely hid the star because he preferred the tree with an unadorned top. The cafe where Jordan took Shelley had a real Christmas atmosphere. It created the anticipation of the holiday, which Shelley always felt during her childhood. Shelley wanted to immerse herself in the magic of Christmas Eve and wished for the world to become a little brighter. "Where did you get that scar, Shelley?" asked Jordan suddenly. The woman flinched at his question, as if it were a physical blow. "Does it matter how I got it?" "No, of course it doesn't matter. You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Jordan shook his head. Shelley thought he seemed a little embarrassed. "I witnessed a fire and saved a child from the flames," Shelley replied. "You know, there's a story in almost every scar. I knew there was a heroic deed hidden in yours. I was not mistaken," Jordan responded. Feeling uneasy with the direction of the conversation, Shelley quickly diverted the topic. "Why do you decide not to accept an invitation to have tea at a girl's house?" she asked. "Oh, it's simple. I just don't want to embarrass anyone, and women's territory is sacred to them," Jordan replied. Shelley smiled and started eating her meal. After lunch, they were offered complimentary gingerbread cookies and hot chocolate. "Great place here, with always friendly atmosphere," praised Jordan. "Truly," Shelley nodded and took a crunchy bite of the little ginger man's leg. "And you, Shelley, are a cruel person," laughed Jordan, took a cookie and bit off the little man's head. And you decided to take his life at once, without giving him a chance, Shelley laughed. At least it's less cruel. Would you agree? Shelley shrugged and took a sip of the divine-tasting hot chocolate. Of course, no one would share the recipe, but Shelley would gladly write it down and try to learn how to make it the same way. The phone rang unexpectedly. It was the headmistress, who informed Shelley that everything was ready, and she could go to pick up Kyle. Jordan, thank you for a pleasant time, but I have to go on business. Yes, me too. Thank you for having lunch with me. Shelley called a cab and prepared for the long-awaited meeting, imagining how happy the boy would be when he found out that today they would leave together. The evening flew by unnoticed. Kyle was so happy that Shelley had taken him with her. He hugged Shelley for a long time in the cab and fell asleep in her arms, and then admired the apartment as if he were in another world. He played with the toys Shelley had bought for him. After dinner he fell asleep with a smile on his lips. Shelley realized that this was precisely how it had to be. There was a reason she met him and got to know him. It's scary to even imagine what would have happened to him if Ted had decided to park near his friend's house. Shelley went to sleep for the first time with a smile on her lips, reflecting on her time with Jordan and thinking about Kyle. Jordan seemed like a good man, but the woman was afraid to get attached and face disappointment again. So she told herself not to think about him. Plus, they hadn't even exchanged contacts, making it unlikely that they'd cross paths again. However, anything could happen, because life is unpredictable. Shelley woke up early in the morning to make breakfast. Pancakes were ready when Kyle woke up. After feeding him, Shelley invited him to decorate the tree while she prepared the vegetables for salad and marinated turkey. She decided not to cook too much. After all, it would only be Kyle and her, and Michelle was set to join them for the next day for tea and cake. Soon the apartment was aglow with multicolored lights captivating Kyle. "Do you like it?" she asked with a smile. "Yes," the boy nodded. "It's so beautiful." "Yes, it is. Christmas Eve is magical, and Santa Claus can fulfill your deepest wish," she said. "I want to be with you," said Kyle, making Shelley's tears run down her cheeks instantly. "I want that very much too," she replied, not daring to tell Kyle that she was already doing everything possible for it. "Let's make a wish together." The boy nodded. A few hours passed. Shelley was doing the last preparations for the holiday, and little Kyle took a nap. Suddenly, someone knocking at the apartment door. Shelley went to open it before they woke up Kyle. He was sleeping so soundly and peacefully that she didn't want to disturb him. Seeing a dishevelled Jordan on the threshold, Shelley stepped back and looked at him apprehensively. "Where is he?" the man asked, looking at her intently. "Who? What happened, Jordan?" she asked, trying to understand everything. The man gently pushed Shelley aside as he entered the apartment, carefully moving his shoes at the doorstep. Although Shelley hadn't invited him in, she held back her indignation because Kyle emerged from the room rubbing his eyes. Seeing Jordan, the boy shrieked, "Daddy!" At that moment, Shelley's worst fears were confirmed. Kyle had called Jordan Daddy. She questioned why fate had brought her together with this man, forcing her to open up to him. Jordan swept Kyle into his arms, holding him tightly, and Shelley was on the verge of tears. Kyle pointed towards the living room and said, "The Christmas tree is over there." Jordan glanced at Shelley, seemingly seeking permission to proceed. The woman nodded. "Of course, you can go through." She realized that she would be spending this Christmas alone, as Kyle would be with his father. Shelley was tempted to ask what kind of father he was, having not thought about his son for so long. However, she held her tongue, as Kyle was overjoyed to see him. Looking at the screen of her phone, Shelley realized that the headmistress had called her to warn her about Kyle's father's arrival, but Shelley was too busy to hear her calls. Nevertheless, she doubted knowing in advance would have made a difference. Shelley went to the kitchen and sat at the table, dreading a decision that could devastate her. About 15 minutes later, Jordan joined her at the table. He slumped, wrapping his arms around his head, and exhaled noisily. "You saved him, didn't you? My son?" the man asked, hesitating to meet Shelley's gaze. Shelley had never believed in such coincidences, but they did occur. It was overwhelming, and she felt on the verge of losing her sanity. "Are you going to take him away from me?" Jordan looked at her and shook his head. "Of course I want to take my son, but I don't want to take him away from you. I didn't know anything about the fire, not even that my ex-girlfriend is dead. We separated when my son was 6 months old because we couldn't see eye to eye. It was hard since I'm calm, and she was too explosive, too impulsive. We were not married because she constantly refused to marry me. Our child lived with her, and I was only allowed rare visits with her consent. She threw tantrums, demanded I see our son less often, that I stay out of his life. Sometimes we agreed to meet, but she wouldn't bring Kyle. I faithfully paid her the money. The situation distressed me and I moved up north for work. I realized I should have fought for my child. I always came for his birthday and New Year's Eve. Those were the days when I could be with my son, giving my ex money for her gifts. This morning she and Kyle were supposed to meet me at the mall. We had agreed on this a couple of months ago. I texted her, but she didn't respond. Out of anger, I decided to go to her house and sort things out, but found ruins instead. Your story flashed through my mind. I started asking neighbours. I found the orphanage where Kyle was placed, and they gave me your address. They told me that Kyle loves you like a mother, and you love him like a son. And I don't know what to do. I'm on the verge of losing it. I was supposed to fly back up north tomorrow, but now I can't. I can't leave my son. I can't burden you with this responsibility. I'll manage, Shelley replied emphatically. I believe you will definitely manage, but I want to be there for him. For you. Shelley felt as if she'd been electrocuted. You are gorgeous, but most importantly, you have an angelic soul. I noticed it that night when you almost hit me with your Christmas tree box. If you give me a chance to show myself, even the slightest chance. I don't know, Jordan. It's all happening too fast. Shelley shook her head. I'm not sure if it's right. It's silly to get together because we both want to be with Kyle. So you didn't like me? Jordan was a straight shooter. I didn't say this, but can't we take it slow? And why drag it out for years when it's already clear? I immediately felt the connection, but I'm not asking you to get into my bed and love me right away. Give me a chance to show myself and try. Currently, Kyle had shouted in the living room and Jordan and Shelley rushed to the sound of his voice. What happened? Shelley asked, looking around at Kyle. There are fireworks out there. He pointed to the window and the woman exhaled with relief, clutching the boy to her. Then she turned on cartoons for Kyle and went back to the kitchen to put the turkey in the oven. Jordan's proposal tugged at her heartstrings, as she found herself genuinely liking the man. But would he have offered a relationship if she hadn't saved his son? Freak! Ted's words echoed in her head. Setting the oven to the right temperature, Shelley stood up and faced Jordan. He caught her as she swayed, pulling her towards him. His eyes held nothing but adoration. But how could this be? Shelley couldn't fathom their mutual attraction, even though she felt herself drawn to him. She tiptoed up, and Jordan leaned in to meet her lips, when the doorbell rang again. Who could that be now? She rushed to open it, instantly finding herself in her mum's arms. Merry Christmas! We couldn't let you spend the holiday alone. Molly almost burst into the house and rushed in to hug her sister. Mum, why didn't you give us a heads up? Kyle and I could have met you. Nonsense, you're clearly busy. We've brought a ton of delicious food. Jordan peeked out from the kitchen, and Sarah looked at him in surprise. You didn't mention you would invite a man, the woman said, embarrassed. I didn't know either, Shelley shrugged. This is Kyle's father, Jordan. And your daughter's fiancé, Jordan quickly added. This surprised Shelley, because he had promised not to rush things. What's the rush when we barely know each other? Interesting details, but we'll have time to share everything later. For now, let's set the table. Christmas is almost here. Molly went to meet Kyle, and Sarah started unpacking the bags, recruiting Jordan and Shelley to help. As the clock struck midnight, Shelley made a wish for more kindness in the world, and for things to work out for Jordan and her. A year later, they all gathered again as a big family. By then, Jordan and Shelley were married. She had adopted Kyle and was expecting a baby. Shelley made plastic surgery, although had learned to love herself in any state. As for Ted, Shelley heard from mutual acquaintances that he had fallen ill with a serious condition, leading him to drink heavily. He had abandoned his pregnant girlfriend Paula and refused to pay child support.